But I want to talk briefly about Seymour as an activist. That was the point that came up. So when I first got to know Seymour, I was writing a very long book on the history of the anti-apartheid movement and relations between U.S. and South Africa. And this is my mother's husband. He's a nice guy. He's originally from South Africa. But I started asking him questions, and I discovered that he had an immense repository of knowledge. So, and I also learned that when I asked him a question, I had to be prepared for a very precise, lengthy answer. So if I just said, hey, what's the difference between the ANC and something else, I got this very deeply thoughtful answer. But I went and interviewed a cousin of his named Jennifer Davis, who is from the American Committee on Africa, one of the leading anti-apartheid groups. And I mentioned that I knew Seymour, and she got very quiet. And I said, do you know anything about Seymour? And she said, however brilliant Seymour may be as a mathematician, his courage and his brilliance as a political strategist in our darkest hour far exceeds that. So I went back to have dinner with this guy, looking at him through a new lens. And I think it's something he didn't talk about very often, but this is a man who came out of South Africa under very difficult conditions, where he stood out and was in grave danger of being suppressed at any moment. And so I want to build on that just a little bit. We are in a unique moment in American history right now where many of our core values are being attacked across all categories, including education, where the fundamental values of the Republic are in jeopardy. And I think Seymour would be surprised that we haven't had more discussion of our civic obligations that flow out of what he has learned and what he taught. And so I want to raise that because we're wrapping up today. Yeah. Seymour cared passionately about democracy. He cared passionately about human rights. We had hour-long conversations, and I think he would want us to reflect not just on all the things we talked about, but what are those implications given that some of our core values and maybe even our functioning democracy may be destroyed. He would want us to reflect on that. So we only have a short amount of time, but what is your reflection on Seymour today as an activist, taking everything that he stood for? How would he be moving forward today?
I'm reminded of a time Nicholas introduced Seymour something here and said, Seymour, when was the last time you were in jail? And so through him, he gave an answer that was so many years was older than he was. But, you know, it was fundamental, but I think you can't, with thinking about Seymour, you can't, like, pull one thing away from another. Mm-hmm. It's integrated. So always the idea of, in terms of social justice, is always deeply there, but it wasn't separated from anything else we would do, and there was always this motivation for these things. But where, you know, I was reading something recently that Seymour wrote, and where he talked about people believing conspiracy theories. And after, with all this violence and with terrorism, he would say, you know, why is it important still that people study math? And he was talking about the type of thinking that's developed and the probabilities that were there. So if you couldn't believe in these conspiracy theories if you had any sense of probabilities in a real way. And so there, in this case, what you're saying is that he deeply believed in the role of developing critical thinking, and where with computation and with mathematics, as every speaker's been talking about, the real world puts us back on your project. But it's more not that you're going to become this kind of engineer or that kind of mathematician, but you are going to be able to think deeply through, all the way through a deep, hard, complex problem, and be able to come up with a functioning answer or a functioning solution. Mm-hmm. And so the part about social justice has absolutely always been all the way through our work, and deeply essential. But it was never disconnected from the importance of learning, and especially in our case, because he would say, lots of people have great ideas about other things, but what we think best about is how we use computation for learning.
Okay.
Yes, I think one of the key elements, and it was mentioned in the previous panel, is the idea and the reality of empowering children to be independent thinkers and to stand for what they believe and to act in the world through the things they create, to the things they share, in the ways in which they collaborate.